All right, welcome back to the channel. So Claressa Shields has a message for Amanda Nunes of the UFC or MMA. It says, "Hey, you ain't the Gwoat," and she doesn't like when people call Amanda Nunes the Gwoat, and she said she would love to have a fight to train to get into the to the octagon against her, but she runs this boxing thing, and if Amanda Nunes was to come near here with them hands, she'd handle her business, so she ain't trying to hear Amanda Nunes. Right now, I feel for Claressa Shields. I understand why people would say that about Amanda Nunes, but there's also a reasonable fix for women's boxing that I wish, it's going to sound bad saying, but truly I wish these changes were made so that Claressa Shields and fighters like that, like Amanda Serrano and Katie Taylor and Cecilia Brækhus retired, and these guys don't have to do what Holly Holmes did and go over there to the UFC. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, the greatest woman boxer alive or currently fighting is Claressa Shields. Two-time Olympic gold medalist, undisputed champion at 106 at middleweight, women's middleweight, champion at 168 pounds for women, women's boxing champion, and at 154 pounds, also a champion, three-weight division champion, undisputed. Cecilia Brækhus, when Cecilia Brækhus lost to Jessica McCaskill last week on DAZN in a fight that was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the torch is passed. I don't want to hear anybody talk about anybody other than Claressa Shields in women boxing being all of that, because it ain't Katie Taylor. Katie Taylor, in my opinion, already lost to that lady. I think her name is Pearson. Jessica McCaskill is a very, very good fighter. Lost to Katie Taylor. And I think she caught, a much older Cecilia Brækhus, who made a mistake in who she hired as a trainer. But regardless, Claressa Shields is all of that in boxing right now, and she is on the path to being the greatest woman of all time, greatest female boxer of all time. And I really do believe that she can achieve that. She's that much better than the field. However, with Amanda Nunes, you're seeing somebody that is really in a different situation, in a better situation than Claressa Shields, and somebody that has already, who much like Cecilia Brækhus in women's boxing, has already proved it, right? By beating Ronda Rousey, beating Holly Holmes, knocking out Ronda Rousey. I'm not sure if she knocked out Holly Holmes or not, but I know she beat Holly Holmes. She beat Chris Cyborg. I think she also beat Shevchenko, even though some people might have thought Shevchenko, and if I mispronounce her name wrong, please forgive me, had beaten her. But, she's locked it down. She's the number one woman in MMA, and that's what it is. So the question really is, when you say, who's the greatest fighter of all time, or right now, or of all time, whatever, however you want to go it, you got to include Amanda Nunes if you're talking about fighters. Like, you can't include her if you're talking about boxers, but you can talk about her if you're talking about fighters and comparing the two, right? Well, if they were comparing men's boxing and women's boxing, it would be very, very difficult to make an argument for whoever they say is the greatest, like John Jones or Anderson Silva or whoever it is that they say is the greatest MMA fighter of all time, Conor McGregor, somebody says that, or Khabib, whoever it is, right? That their accolades are not going to compare to the boxers, the men boxers that people are saying are the greatest of all time. It's just the difference between the sports and the history of the sport is it's night and day. But that's not the case with women's boxing. With women's boxing, they're pretty much on par as far as not as far as the length of their history, but really about, is the amount of fervor and interest of women. MMA is at a peak right now that I don't think that boxing has ever been at. The women's boxing has ever been at. And so because of the money that's getting paid to them, about the the ability to have multiple fights and all that, you actually see fighters women that were boxers moving from out of boxing into MMA, which is why you hear that conversation about even Claressa Shields. In order to really make big money and get the mega fights, she's in a situation where she might have to switch over to MMA to really get to that level. And it's a sad, unfortunate situation because women's boxing is an excellent sport and very fun to watch. But, there are some advantages that women's MMA has over women's boxing that if you're not willing to address, it's not going to change. Okay. And I'm going to say these things and I don't want to sound, I'm just going to say them because I think these things are true. I can understand why if women boxers felt like, nah, we're not trying to do that. We want to be purists to the sport. I can understand them taking that position too. But there are 2 or 3 things they got to change about women's boxing in order to make it something that is really attractive to people for them to watch. You know what I mean? Because you're trying to get eyes on you. And by and large, I have to assume that most of the MMA fans for UFC are men. I'm sure that they do have a large women demographic, and especially but most of the people that I hear talking about women's MMA are men. I don't see a lot of difference between the treatment of like Amanda Nunes and the interest in Amanda Nunes fights, with men. A lot of men are interested in that. So, but in women's boxing, it's really not the case. Every once in a while, you'll get somebody that they're interested in, like a Layla Ali or Claressa Shields, but it's few and far between. Now, why could that? This is why I think some of it could be, and some changes need to be made to women's boxing that would give you some of the same thrill that you can get from women's MMA. And the 2 things are this: 1, change the uniform. Women are fighting looking like little boys. That's not going to be, all you're going to be looking at when you look at a women fight is how straight their jabs are and all that. That's not the case with women's MMA. Women's MMA, they wear leotards, their stomachs are out, you see their legs, they look like, when they're standing there, they look like, provided that they are actually an attractive woman, they look like an attractive woman. They look like something that a man wouldn't mind spending 45 minutes and a lot of money paying to watch. But women with shorts all the way past their knees, wearing the same uniform that the men are. Actually, not even wearing the same uniform that men are. They got to wear, they're wearing this big long shirt that men don't even have to wear. Right? So if they change the uniform from the which would have to be more comfortable, by the way, from less of a boxing looking uniform, more to a UFC looking uniform, that might actually bring some people in there to watch because they'll be interested in the women that are on there. And I don't mean to demean people and say that they need to do stuff and overly sexualize themselves and all that. I don't believe that that's the truth, but it is something really that men do look at, and you could make a big improvement on it if they weren't dressed like 14, if they didn't look like 14-year-old boys in the ring. That's number 1. Number 2, dude, will you go to 3-minute rounds, please? 2-minute rounds, you're never going to get any knockouts. If you don't have any knockouts, people ain't going to be interested because there's no real highlight there to show. But if you go 3 rounds, if you go the full amount of rounds, and you go the full amount of rounds, and on top of it, you have 3-minute rounds, you're gonna have a higher likelihood of a knockout. And it's just interesting to me that, like, when you listen to people justifying the use of like Tyson Fury's gloves that didn't have any padding over the knuckle, right? When they talk about the manufacturing of the glove, well, they say, well, we prefer the MX glove or the Paffin glove because it's important to bring excitement to the sport of boxing. What's the excitement? Seeing somebody get knocked out. Well, if you're having women fight 2-minute rounds, if you had men fighting 2-minute rounds, 10 2-minute rounds, many of the knockouts that you see in men's sports are going to go away because there's just at least 1/3, you know what I'm saying? There's at least 1/3 left fight. There might be, quite honestly, man, might be half of the fighting that takes place in a women's fight. It takes place in a men's fight when you're stopping fights after 6 rounds and, or whether they go to 10, but championship for men are going to 12 and they got 3-minute rounds. So there's another that's 12 minutes. That's at least 12 minutes plus 2 rounds, but plus 6. That's another 18 minutes of fighting. Another 18 minutes of fighting, much more time for something to pop off and happen. So, in lieu of Claressa Shields going over there, first of all, Amanda Nunes is in the strongest position to say she's the greatest woman fighter of all time because she's beaten the better competition or she's beaten the more known competition, right? As far as being a fighter. And in women's MMA, she can I do believe it's safe to say that she can say it in MMA because she's literally beaten everybody else that could have made that argument, right? Whether it's Cyborg or it's Ronda Rousey. But unless there's something that creates more interest in women's boxing, and that can be, again, how the women look, how long the rounds go, and how many rounds that there are. Even if you had to do something like lightening up, like I wouldn't, I don't want to put it into like things that are really going to risk people's health, but those are the type of things that'll draw the interest. And once the interest is there, you're going to get more women in there fighting. And when you have more women in there fighting, then Claressa Shields is going to have more have more opportunities to prove that she's the greatest fighter. And one example of this for me is a young fighter that is a young female fighter. I'm not sure how young she is now, but I think she was promoted by Evander Holyfield. Her name is Alyssa Baumgardner. Man, Alyssa Baumgardner, I don't think I've seen her fight 2 times, dude, but I guarantee you I've seen her train. I've seen all of her training videos at least 4 times. You know what I'm saying? So I'm waiting for Alyssa Baumgardner to pop up on a television screen. Though when she pops up on a television screen, and she's fighting, she's more than likely not going to look like she's looking in them training videos that make me want to watch her, right? So I would say, man, come on, y'all. Women's boxing, I understand if you want to be hardcore, you don't want to give into the commodification of women. I understand that, but understand, dude, that it is not a mistake that MMA is doing better because their fights are better. They're more interesting to watch. They're pretty much the same rules as men, so you know what you're getting. Man, I just hope boxing moves in that direction, for the sake of fighters like Claressa Shields, because she really does deserve all the credit she's getting and a little bit more. Anyway, that's my take on the matter. You let me know what you think, and with that, I'm out.